Dude, these are so much better than our names.
I know.
Why would we? Why can't we have Frost Month and Blood Month?
I know. Hi, everyone. This is part 2 of our foray into the darkest time of the year. In this final installment, we talk about the history of some old holidays. I think we also managed to discuss death even more this time around, so please be warned about that. We talk about grief and loss, the decomposition of human bodies. Yeah, again, for those of you that listened to the first episode on vampires, I'm going to go on record and say that is not going to become a super regular thing. Please remember, we are not a self-help podcast. We are not the type of doctors that give medical advice. We do hope that you're enjoying the dark, or if you listen to this at some future point that is not November, that you're just enjoying whatever time of day the sun is setting. We're going to be back soon, if all goes according to plan, to talk about the horror of Thanksgiving. So you can put that on your plate and save it for later. This is the darkest time of the year, part 2. All right, part 2.
Part 2. Let's do it.
All right. So I think it's safe to say that poets and philosophers, the famous ones and the ones in each and every one of us, help us to define the fall, help us ruminate on the late fall as winter approaches. I had also wondered about the history of that time of year. And that's kind of a strange concept to cast in terms of having a history because it's so big, it's a little abstract. And it's not very grounded. So I don't have a huge amount of history that I want to bring in for this topic. I used much of my allotted time on lyrical analysis. But, you know, when we talked about vampires, I gave much more of a walkthrough on folklore and distinct historical trends and movements. I think what I want to talk through this time is more general. And I feel like the historical actors are like the human race or like whole ass cultures.
Okay.
Again, like kind of at least people in parts of the world, past and present, who experience a fall when the harvest is collected and is followed by a winter that is cold and dark and historically sort of difficult to survive.
Yeah.
So those are our people and they are many. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Because as we said before, some version of that people is like true in many, many, many parts of the world.
Yeah.
And people have always thought very deeply about this transitional moment, this bridge in the year, and they have observed and celebrated it. So I've wrapped my head around the history of this time of year by thinking about holidays. Doug, philosophically speaking, what and why are holidays?
I certainly have not studied the philosophy of holidays. I'm sure that there's something out there. From a philosophical perspective, I would say that the answer is going to be connected to what we were talking about in a previous conversation, namely that we can't help but to experience our lives in cycles and rhythms, and we need ways of carving up time. And we need ways of coming together and sharing, like developing a shared language and a shared set of activities so that we can, I don't know how else to say it other than like go through life together.
Oh, that's a nice way to say it.
You know, like we're all kind of in this great journey together. And culture in general has to be woven together by shared experiences and practices. Holidays, the purpose seems to me somewhere in that territory. That is, it's a node in the cultural matrix. And it's probably also connected. I don't know the history of this. You would know much better than I would. But I would suspect that historically they're connected with important times of the year, like seasonal changes and solstices and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And you can think it's connected, I think, to ritual and ceremony in general. Why do we have graduation ceremonies? Why do we have weddings?
That is a beautiful answer.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, they are ritual markers of shared values. And what you're saying about reflecting different times of year, you will see in this history. I promise that I will not linger too much on Halloween, even though my personality definitely lingers too much on Halloween. But you might know that the holidays that eventually get consolidated into Halloween have stressed the transitional nature of this time of year, tied again both to the end of harvest, collection of grown goods, and also to the beginning of winter, especially the winter solstice, the dark stretch to the winter solstice. At which point, the light starts to return little by little, inch by inch. As soon as winter hits, officially, the days start getting longer. I kind of always forget that. I think of winter as the dark season.
Yeah, that is weird. Yeah.
Yeah, but the light is coming back. And Christmas, I know we've tabled Christmas, but it's just impossible to not talk about it when we're sitting in this bridge between Halloween and Christmas. It is on December 25th. That's like as soon as winter starts, but a few days after winter starts. It's no historical accident that Christmas, even though there's this understanding of it as a Christian holiday that celebrates the birth of Jesus, it's not an accident that it is also pretty much a solstice holiday with a lot of lingering pagan practices as well. Conversation for another day, but it is all in this vein of like this time of year meaning something to people over time. And that it really is a bridge between our distinct consumer holiday moments of Halloween and Christmas.
Yeah.
That there is really a bridge there. So many societies have contemplated this long process between the collection of summer's bounty and then the solstice and the long winter. Halloween, you might know, draws a lot from the Celtic Samhain. Halloween is not a direct lift from Samhain, but it is helpful to look at Samhain in a larger context than just kind of the advent of Halloween tradition. So it was this ancient Celtic tradition, Celts in Ireland, Scotland, British Isles more broadly, and it was a threshold event. It marked the end of the summer half of the year and the beginning of the dark half of the year, splitting it kind of into two instead of four, although there were, different major Celtic fire celebrations to kind of more acutely recognize the passage of time.
Okay.
And it acknowledged the transitional time we go from outdoor life and labor to indoor life and reflection and hunkering down.
Interesting. I like that. And I didn't know that. Was it spooky? Is it spooky in the way that Halloween is? Does it have anything to do with like...
We would say yes.
Okay.
We would say yes. I don't know when this concept of the way that we imagine spookiness to exist, like a fun version of fright, I don't really know when that seeps in. That's something that I should know as a Halloween enthusiast.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know either.
Yeah, so Samhain inspired modern jack-o'-lanterns. It has supernatural associations, even some versions of costumes and trick-or-treating.
Oh, wow.
But again, it's not a direct lift. It is just the most obvious cognate. We would stick this Samhain celebration on our calendar around October 31st or November 1st.
Okay.
But it was really tuned into the transitional aspect of this season. Part of that moment included culling animals, slaughtering animals to, process meat for the winter. So the death element of the holiday is very front and center.
Yeah, interesting. But it's death connected to, I mean, this is something we didn't get into in our last discussion that feels really important, the connection to harvest.
Yes.
And just like the way we sustain ourselves and nourish ourselves.
Yes.
And it's very human, or at least it used to be, to have some sort of ritual around the killing of animals, some way of honoring the animal that you're going to eat. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can see how it's a natural fit for this kind of holiday.
Right. And as you said, like the kind of the concept of sacrifice.
Yeah.
That is a type of ceremony. Yeah. So the words October and November are the straightforward Latin month names for what had been the 8th octo and 9th novum month on the old Roman calendar. But there are etymologies in other languages for like whatever different societies called this time of year. And some of them are really interesting. So the Old English word for what we would call November means blood month.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. I love that. Do you know what is it?
Yeah, so I'm a little rusty on my Old English. I can try it.
Please do.
Lot Manoth, or thereabouts.
Wow. I want to reclaim that.
Yes. Okay, well, you'll like this too. Similarly, in Old Norse, which is a Germanic cousin of Old English, one of their months meant slaughter month.
Wow.
And it would be like our late October, early November.
Wow.
I can give that one a try too.
Yes, let's hear it.
Gormanator.
Gormanator.
They also had a period that followed for what would have kind of been like our late November through early December. And that meant something like frost month or Yule.
Dude, these are so much better than our names.
I know.
Why would we why can't we have frost month and blood month? What was it, month 8, month 9?
I know, except they're not even the 8th or the 9th months anymore.
Yeah. I think we should start a petition and get this changed.
I know. And I love the Gormanutor because you hear gore. And when I looked up the etymology of gore, it directed me to Old English. And I love the concept of the frost month.
That's great.
I don't know the name of that one. I guess I'm a little bit less enthusiastic about the animal slaughter, but like Blood Month does sound very cool.
Blood Month is cool. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it too. I knew you would.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
So this is really funny. I didn't even go looking for this information, oddly enough. I do think linguistics would provide a lot more insight about our topic, but it's just not either one of our areas. Mm-hmm. I'm reading a book called The Apple, A Delicious History by Sally Coulthard, and that book mentioned these like Germanic animal slaughter.
Oh, wow. So,
yeah, this was just like a convergence in my life. It's a good book. It's literally about the history of apples. I'm enjoying it.
What a gem. That's great. I'm glad that you stumbled on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, wait, did I text you saying I have a fun November fact to share with you?
Oh, you did. Is this okay, nice. That
was it. Yeah.
Great.
It was Blood Month. Okay, back to the fall history more broadly. When Christians conquer pagan groups around Europe, this was a very long process, enabled in part by the Christianization of the Roman Empire in like the several early centuries AD. They didn't like what they saw as ungodly pagan holidays across Europe, right? But rather than always just take away really important cultural markers, they might try to morph them into something more acceptably Christian, like a more syncretic approach.
Yeah.
So, do you know All Saints Day and All Souls Day?
I know the language, and I think I know vaguely. Is All Souls Day the day after Halloween? That's about the limits of what I know.
These are Christian holidays. It's Pope Gregory IV who mandates All Saints Day in the 8th century, and then All Souls Day comes later. I think that I might have seen at least All Saints Day, like marked on a calendar occasionally growing up.
They're on, yeah, at least when I was a kid, they were on calendars, I think.
Yeah, they honor the dead broadly, like the holy dead in All Saints Day. And then All Souls Day is more general. Part of the teaching is like it's the dead in purgatory or something, but these never managed to nudge out Samhain entirely, ever.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, we don't go trick-or-treating for All Souls Day.
No, what we end up with is this like trifecta of dead honoring days, though. So together, the three make up Hallowtide. There's All Hallows Eve, Hallowmass, and All Souls Day. Like hallow means saint, also derived from Old English, like holy. So that's that was this early Christian conception, but Samhain is still very much alive in that, and it is at the same time of year, starting to stretch, though, into November. There are other celebrations throughout time and around the world that we would also recognize a lot of similarity in, whether they're actual cognates or not. So one is El Dia de los Muertos, which happens November 1st in Mexico and some other parts of Latin America. And that's an obvious cognate of the All Souls celebration. It also blends indigenous tradition with the Catholic context.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I was going to ask about the origins. So is it kind of like a mix of those two? Huh.
Yes, exactly. It is not a desolate or dark holiday, really. It's lively and beautiful with altars and flowers, the sugar skulls that have been thoroughly appropriated, great food, celebrations with family and loved ones. And it's in that context of probing the veil between the living and the dead, which is supposed to be thinnest through these dark weeks.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
But it is such a positive celebration with lively traditions. And some of those traditions are in cemeteries. So it is a different cultural conception of dealing with death and being with family and ancestors and contemplating that veil. It takes this really colorful form.
Yeah, that's interesting. It doesn't feel, I mean, just in like the visual representations that I see, it doesn't feel particularly somber or bleak. It feels
no, not at all
exuberant and joyful, which is kind of cool to couple that with a recognition of death, which is normally seen as bleak and depressing.
Yes, and the celebration of family and ancestral lines. And again, it's tied to indigenous tradition, which is really important to hold on to in family lines and to acknowledge in places that have experienced colonialism. So it's a very productive holiday in that way. It's doing a lot of work. Everyone I have known who has celebrated it culturally loves it and finds a ton of meaning in it. It's a great time to learn about people's families and have really great food.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, it makes me kind of sad, actually, that we don't have anything like this as a culture. Like we mourning or remembering is a very private thing.
Yes.
From family to family, or often I think even from person to person. Like we kind of do it on our own. And yeah, it makes me feel that we're missing something. And it would be less sad,
yeah.
I think, if we were to do it collectively.
Yes. I mean, part of all of this is what you conceive of following death. That factors into how you would observe or experience it or honor it. I imagine at some point in some future conversation, we will talk about the development of mourning rituals through the Victorian era and how much this has all changed in mainstream, what becomes American culture.
Sounds good.
But these holdovers from other traditions, Dia de los Muertos, and then other, I'll talk about. Some of these other holidays are still, I think, really in touch with healthy relationships between life and death and the ancestral plane, whatever you want to call it. There are also celebrations or observations in like other hemispheres and parts of the world, other cultural traditions that emphasize communion with the dead or remembrance of the dead or bringing light into the darkness with candles and flames and lanterns. All things that I think make intuitive sense at this transitional time of year, and also things that often go together. Fire was very big in Samhain, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's Diwali in India, the Hindu festival of lights in like October and November. I'll do my best here. There's Chongyong in China. People visit graves. They hike mountains, eat traditional foods. I saw some mention of chrysanthemum wine. That sounds amazing.
Oh, yeah.
That one is based on the lunar calendar, but typically falls in October on the Gregorian calendar. In the medieval Christian world, people observed Martinmas on November 11th.
Martinmas? What is Martinmas?
Martinmas, yeah. Saint Martin.
Okay.
I honestly don't know what he was getting up to. This is another Christian saint day.
Okay.
But, a day dedicated to his honor and remembering him.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we get into Advent in the Christian tradition, which is expressly a prelude to Christmas.
Yeah.
It's 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. They are Advent, and they celebrate Jesus, and I think are supposed to be, again, like contemplative and very spiritually thoughtful. Although my association with Advent, the only thing that I've ever known about it is like the Advent calendar, which is, again, back to consumerism and gifts and stuff. But I don't think that's historically what Advent was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Hanukkah has a very specific origin story, but it is also the Festival of Lights, and we've heard that refrain elsewhere. Again, it moves around a lot on the Gregorian calendar, but I think in the popular imagination, it typically gets lumped into the winter holiday season.
Yeah.
How, like, elementary schools will sing a Christmas song and a Hanukkah song or whatever.
Yeah.
Or like Adam Sandler built a Hanukkah song industry to go along with Christmas music.
Yeah. I remember listening to that when I was a kid. I loved it.
Yes. All right. Like Halloween, a few things converged to create Christmas, like the Christmas that we observe. And I will say again, it's not a coincidence that it's essentially a solstice celebration. Mm-hmm. And that's apart from the Jesus story, of course. It's probably another conversation how extremely pagan it is, as it's a Yule and solstice celebration. But it is the bookend for this darkest stretch of the year. Uh-huh. And the early winter celebrations are celebrations of light in the darkness. And the light, again, slowly returns following the winter solstice. It's also worth noting that in much more recent history, in the US, we have added both Veterans Day and Thanksgiving in November, right? Days advertised as opportunities for gratitude and remembrance in keeping with these old themes. Mm-hmm. So I think what we talked about in the poems, we see reflected in the history of the late fall holidays too, I think. Like all roads seem to lead to this set of reflections despite climate and cultural differences in many places. Wherever there's a fall, that becomes a winter. Is that, like, obvious to a philosopher?
What do you mean, is what obvious?
That these would be somewhat universal reflections. Because as, like, a cultural historian, I wouldn't tend to assume ever that things are universal. But I wonder if philosophical questions are just more universal, if it's just about a larger set of questions.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that philosophers tend to have the opposite impulse. That is, I think we're often too quick to jump to assuming that things are universal. So it's good that you and I are talking to one another.
I know.
But yes,
that is
my
good.
instinct would have been, of course, this would be universal. You know, I've learned to temper that over the years. So, you know, who knows? But I think the sense of transition, the feeling of transition between a period of life and vibrancy and brightness into a period of darkness and death and decay. Although it's actually interesting why we associate winter with death, given that the trees don't actually die. I suppose, you know, some plants die.
Yeah.
Probably there was a lot more death in the olden times. Like sometimes people didn't survive the winter. Like if you didn't have a good harvest and it was a rough winter and
yes. Yeah, it can kill you.
Yeah, like it was deadly. So it does make sense to me that this would be a fairly widespread, if not totally universal thing.
I'm wondering, I gave a very brief overview, but what do we still reflect on given these themes? What do we not reflect on as a species or, you know, from our own, you know, cultural lens?
I guess a couple things stand out to me. All of them are connected to, again, the connection or the absence of connection to the natural cycles of the world that we live in. I don't think that we, and again, just to clarify, when I say we, I mean sort of mainstream American culture. I don't think that we're very attuned to anything about like harvesting. There's Thanksgiving, which we can talk about maybe, but even that is like, you know, it's questionable what the nature of that holiday is. But even in its best gloss, so to speak, it's like coming together for a feast and giving thanks. But as people practice it, it's not about like the harvest. At least that's not my perception of it. And this is something to do with how remote we are from the way that our food is handled, I think.
Yeah.
Like, and that's something that we've just lost. Like,
Yes.
at least most people. I imagine it's quite different if you're like a farmer.
Right, because these things still happen, but with industrial agriculture
Yeah.
and global food systems, the what's in season is almost irrelevant to what you can buy in the average supermarket.
Yeah. And even just the act of buying it in a supermarket.
Yeah.
You know, unless you go out of your way, like there's no dirt on your on your food.
You got to get to the CSA, you got the farmers market.
Yeah, it's just kind of.
But a lot of that food is less accessible to people though.
Yeah.
Like, right?
It's
It's a privilege to get to go to a farmer's
For
market
sure.
and buy the fresh produce. Yeah.
You have to be willing to pay more for like the experience or the support, trying to support those practices because it's not efficient. They can't survive in the competitive world doing, more basic forms of farming unless people who have the disposable income are willing to say, I'll pay more for this because I want to support it and I like to have dirt on my carrots or whatever it is. So that's one thing that I feel like we've probably lost. I think that the idea of light we do Christmas lights, and jack-o'-lanterns and stuff, but we don't have to escape from the darkness, really. Like we're constantly, unless we're asleep, we're almost constantly around either the sunlight or artificial light. So I don't think that there's a felt sense of like, we need to bring light against the darkness. At least I don't feel that. Do you feel that like Christmas lights, does that signify for you like honoring the collective bringing of light against the darkness?
No, Christmas lights to me are just pretty. I think I feel a little bit more reverence to an actual fire.
Yeah.
I don't have a fireplace. Steve just watches Yule log on TV all
Hell
winter.
Yeah. I used to do that. Yeah. I used to have a favorite Netflix log.
Birchwood Home Edition.
I don't remember what it was called, but I knew all the phases of it. Like I knew.
Yes.
It was great. So
we are a Birchwood family. But I think there is something nice about tending to a fire. It's obviously multisensory, and that can make me kind of appreciate the power of fire and like the power of the sun and warmth. I do spend a lot of time cold in the winter. I'm like borderline anemic, and I'm also just like a small person. That does make me think about kind of like a fight in the winter for comfort and survival, but I also voluntarily go like, outside running and doing sports in the winter, knowing that I get to return back to a safe and cozy place. And I've had only a few run-ins with cold weather where I did actually think, oh, I might die. Once was camping in the White Mountains, and people do die doing it. But like, I didn't stare into the face of mortality.
You didn't get that?
No, it was like, okay, we have to play this right or else we might actually be in trouble here. But I'd say I'm like, my life is pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
And so the lights just become part of the aesthetic.
Yeah. And then the other thing is just death, the way we relate to death. And this is a question I wanted to ask you. I wonder if you feel that the way we do Halloween with like horror movies and stuff and like spooky costumes and that sort of thing, is it a way of turning towards mortality and accepting that? Or is it a kind of distraction? Is it like trying to make it into entertainment? It feels different to me than, for example, honoring our dead ancestors, right? That would be a very different practice. Or like walking through the graveyard or whatever. Like watching a movie that gets you scared about people in the movie getting killed. In some ways it has to do with death, but I'm not sure if it's serving the same purpose.
To me, secular Halloween is kind of invoking and celebrating like magic and mystery in some way that still feels alive and well to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so much about actual ruminations on death, I guess. One of the reasons I am happy to be living while we're living is because it is such a golden age of horror movies with studios like A24. And I do think that horror movies are some are so well written
Yeah.
and are much more impressionable and raise some of these questions, like, are just more effective as stories.
Yeah, I agree.
I love the jump scare bullshit of the 80s or whatever, but this is all in a literal entertainment industry. But I do think that recently we've gotten some stuff that, like Midsummer and Hereditary.
Yeah.
I saw Midsummer shortly after my dad died, and I was like, oh, this is like a brilliant rumination on grief. This is exactly what grief is. And Steve was like, what? But for me, that movie was kind of a great tool in thinking about the aftermath of losing somebody that you love.
That's so interesting. Yeah, and it's just such a good sign of the artistic value of something like that, that it can speak to you in that moment while also speaking something very different to Steve, who's sitting right next to you.
Yeah.
Like that's what all great art can do. It has that wide capacity.
Yeah, and I do think some of these movies are like real art.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
And that lends itself, I think, very well to, more morbid topics in a more thoughtful way.
Yeah, so maybe there's something like, I was being a little bit hasty when I was talking about watching a movie where we're scared of people getting killed or whatever. Like that does oversimplify what happens. And I mean, like there's something like the dark places of our psyche that these movies help. They help us to process and think through and turn towards. And there's definitely some value in that. And even if it's not turning us towards the fact of our own mortality, which is a very specific dark place in our psyche, it's turning us towards other dark places, which maybe there's something to be said for that.
Well, this is like when you watched 8 serial killer movies back to back without sleeping and then went completely insane.
Indeed. I'll never do that again.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, we are so desensitized to, fictional depictions of death. And Halloween is also commercialized so thoroughly by this point. Yeah. This is really related to another question about historical memory that I've thought about a lot, and it overlaps a lot with the Halloween context. So I have been teaching this class on the history of folk magic and witchcraft persecution, and I was bringing students out to Salem, Massachusetts every year, and I spend a lot of time in Salem. I was married in Salem. I love Salem. But I always want the students to really ask themselves how it all lands, that this whole tourist industry, the whole year-long Halloween celebration, essentially, is rooted in a historical tragedy. And that brings up all sorts of questions about historical distance and about honoring a history versus commodifying it and profiting off of it. I ask them to consider what's fun and memorable for them to go do, what it feels like to look at, a memorial versus to go into one of the Halloween experiences, the haunted houses, the witch museums. Like, what even is the history that you absorb from going to a place like Salem, where we had the largest and only sizable witch hunt in the United States? One of the most famous events of early American history. Yeah,
those are such good questions. Do you have a sense that the students are they noticing differences here in terms of how they experience these different things?
I curate half of their day, as you know, because you have chaperoned with me on the trip.
But I actually didn't have any kind of follow up with the students or how they processed it.
Yeah, so I do bring them to some type of theatrical or museum experience, and then they get to explore within some geographical bounds in the afternoon. And so I will hear about what they did with their time. I also ask them to go see the memorial. So their set of observations are typically like, I had fun, and it was weird. And I'm like, yes, those are very standard responses. I think some of them do feel like it's weird and morbid that it stems from a dark history. But then some savvy student will always ask, well, what do they do in places like Sweden and Scotland or across Europe where there were massive witch hunts, Germany? And usually the answer is nothing. I won't say that history has been lost, but the stories of individuals, so many of these women are gone pretty
Yeah.
much. Like you might be able to dig some of it out of an archive. You can use court transcripts. They're in academic books or whatever. But you can argue that Salem keeps the story as a parable alive so thoroughly through what they do. And depending on where you go and what you visit, you might be asked to reckon with the concept of a witch hunt, with scapegoating a vulnerable group. Salem is a very inclusive place. They're very openly pro LGBTQ. And so they will talk about queer communities getting scapegoated again in certain mainstream attractions. Now, there are others that are just kind of go get spooked. We do Halloween here, monsters, ghosts, yay. And then I'd say more of the students than not do say that they have a really good time. But if they didn't go in with context, they might actually miss the entire history of the town.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and what a great service for you to offer to them. I remember, I loved that trip so much because you and I went to that show, that kind of theater performance with the students, and then they did their own thing, and you were basically my personal tour guide through that city.
Yeah, I wouldn't shut up.
I had been there before. Angie took me for my birthday. This was many years ago. But basically because I like Halloween. And it was very much this is a fun Halloween place to go. And I did learn some of the history because I did go to the museums and stuff. But it wasn't anything like what I got with you, where I really felt this is cool. I'm learning all about the history of this place and the context that I need to understand what this place is and where it comes from.
That's the same question about the holidays too. Are we just doing a different version of remembrance, or has consumerism gotten us so far away from maybe a more organic human approach to contemplating this veil between the living and the dead? Do we now need stories and movies and plastic things to ride out that part of the year, or are we still doing it internally?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. I think it's kind of a mixed bag, I think it's a bit of both. I know we were going to table Christmas, but
we can't avoid it.
That's the easiest one to talk about in terms of consumerism and stuff, because it's so obvious what we mean.
Yeah.
And there's just no escaping that. And yet I don't know, it does seem to me that it's not all rotten to the core. There's something really nice and genuine, or there can be, about giving and receiving gifts, and just the warmth of coming together during that time of year to share and offer generosity, and that can be present alongside all of the consumerist stuff.
And I'm not immune to the consumerism.
Yeah, same.
I get really excited when I see something that I think somebody would like and I can afford it, right? I just bought you a small cast iron crow figurine because it reminded me of you.
I have it right here. I am holding it up as we speak.
And it's a great feeling. It's oh, this reminds me so much of my friend, and there's going to be this great moment when I give it to him. And I love that. I do make most gifts. I am a kindergartner. I make everybody their freaking holiday gifts, but that's just it's very economical. But it's also very fun. You have to have time for it, but it's very fun. That all feels really good. And also Halloween is not free from maybe not an equal degree of consumerism, because presents aren't really part of it, although I don't know, I do sort of exchange Halloween gifts with people, including you.
Yeah. This is a practice that we've developed over the years.
Yeah, and I'm just biased towards that holiday because I like it so much, and so I think that consumerism bothers me less than the Christmas consumerism, because I kind of like the stupid vintage looking plastic glowing Halloween orb that I'm going to put on my stoop for trick-or-treaters or whatever.
Yeah.
Halloween feels, it's a version of a magic feeling that I think is more resonant with me as an adult than the Christmas magic, even though that is a really lovely feeling too. But I also think that Halloween has this doofy element. You dress up in these silly costumes. I am such a homemade costume person. And like, there's just not the veneer of, I don't know, like the perfectionism of Christmas, I think, in a lot of the way.
Yeah, there's a lot more room to be goofy. I guess, like with ugly sweater stuff, I think there's
That's true.
people are trying to do some of that. But you're right that the holiday itself of Christmas feels more serious.
Or formal, maybe?
More formal, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be. I mean, you can celebrate it any way you want. But I also love that. I mean, I know trick-or-treating has like kind of, it's almost dying out.
Yeah.
But I got to go trick-or-treating this year because my very kind elderly neighbor gave me a bag and was like, you must go trick-or-treating, because my friend and I were in gigantic inflatable matching costumes.
Dude, I love that. That's the best. I am pretty sure I'll never have the chance to go trick-or-treating again. I hope it happens, but you give me hope.
It was wonderful. I know. Well, because I mean, I'm tiny, like, and that pig costume was very large. You could see very little of me. Obviously, it's a huge costume, but I could easily be mistaken for a kid or a teenager in it. And so people would come up to us to like give us candy. This was not me going to doors. People would like come to us almost. And I was like, oh, I'm an adult. You don't have to give me candy. And I live in a really nice neighborhood. Like, the people are so down to earth and they're like, you deserve candy. Take some candy. Your costume's amazing. I associate Halloween with the communal celebration with neighbors. I went trick-or-treating growing up. It was huge in my town. And for a lot of neighbors, it was like kind of the only time you might see them. But then, like, okay, let's say, like a little kid or, like, I don't know, not a really little kid, an 11-year-old comes dressed as something. You have the little conversation with them. Oh, I love your costume. Then that kid is biking around the neighborhood, falls and skins their knee right in front of your house. And you run out and you help them. You have some frame of reference for each other.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm like lamenting the loss of that, just kind of like checking in on your neighbors through this really silly, fun holiday.
Yeah, it's a really nice illustration of how holidays, like, they could serve the social function of bringing communities together. And ideally, I think that's what they should do. That's their purpose.
Yeah, and I mean, Samhain was a communal celebration, and I guess in a lot of the earlier iterations of these holidays, I mean, there are real fears and profound things to be grateful for that we just don't feel as acutely. In my mind, I keep thinking about Memento Mori and thinking about like these kind of late fall holidays that ruminate on death, like those reminders that we all die. There's so much old symbolism about the Memento Mori piece. There's so much literature on it. Like, but we don't encounter death as much publicly as we used to. And should we be forcing more of that? Should we still be doing that? Or is the world different now? And the way we think about death is and should be different.
Yeah. I think that we ignore death. We look away from death at our own peril. I don't think we've found some new equilibrium where time has moved on, we've made progress, and now there's simply no need to think about death. We can just put it out of sight, out of mind.
Right, like it still happens.
It's just, it's not healthy. I don't think it's good for us. But I don't think we should like force people to confront death, because we're now in a situation where basically many of us don't have the tools that we need to really process the fact that we're going to die and our loved ones are going to die. And we live in a widespread shared state of denial. And it's probably not healthy to just force that open either, because it will be traumatizing and it's terrifying to people. So there are these, I'm really interested in Buddhist philosophy and history and meditation practices. And a big part of certain Buddhist traditions is death meditation. It gets very detailed. You meditate on the different stages of decomposition of a corpse. In certain parts of the world, you actually do this. You go to a burial ground and you sit with a corpse overnight. You watch it decay, and then you sit in meditation and you reflect, my body too is of the same nature. This body will one day be like that, oozing and festering with maggots crawling through it. And it sounds horrible. And these practices are not widely taught in the West. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing, because I think it could be very traumatizing for people who have grown up in a culture where death is sanitized and pushed out of view, to just, you can find these images online of like corpses decaying and stuff.
Yeah.
And when I was exploring these practices, I did that. I probably am on some FBI watch list just looking for pictures of dead bodies. It turns out the best ones are in these obscure Burmese websites. So I was using like Google Translate to get me through these Burmese PDFs that I found that were from monks, like when you couldn't make it out to the cemetery, like here are some dead bodies. Look at these. And it's extremely disturbing. And without a lot of context and preparation, it might not have been good for me to do that. In the end, it was very helpful, and I'm really glad I did. But because we don't have appropriate supports in place for this as a culture, I'm not sure what we should do about it. I think like what I would hope for is that there could be some large scale culture shift, and it would have to be a secular one, because we're too diverse of a culture to try to just reclaim some religious way of doing this. But there are all kinds of secular ways that we could start to rethink how we relate to death. And I think that would be very, very useful. I think it would be good for doctors, for example. I think it would be good for people who work in end-of-life care. It would be good for families.
Yeah. I mean, so much of what's in these holidays, and also what you're talking about now, is a preparation for death. But then also, like, I feel like we are completely out of whack with mourning. We just don't have good communal support for mourning. This is something that I have thought a lot about and felt very acutely as a completely non-religious person, and not having any type of religious practice or context to fall into, having no belief in like an afterlife in any of the ways that I've ever heard it expressed. And then like losing the person who like meant the most to me ostensibly in the world. And just, I got really mad at the fact that there was no good cultural toolkit for mourning. And that even like so much of it and so much of grief is kind of taboo and intensely personal, when this is such a fundamental human experience. And then I got really interested in other mourning rituals, but they're so tied to cultures, and I haven't grown up in a culture that really has them. I keep thinking also about patience being a virtue, and how it could be more of an exercised virtue in my life. Unless I'm working with kids or animals, I feel my patience dwindle in other areas.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, since you're practiced at a number of things that require patience, and since I feel like you're a pro at this time of year. I feel like you're doing it right. I mean, like, what's the philosophy of waiting, or what can you give me that will help me?
Yeah, this is I really like this question, because I think patience is it's so important to human life. And I can remember, I saw this, this was years ago when I was on the subway, and I saw this advertisement. It was when Uber was just like making a big push to become popular and be the method of choice of transportation. And they had this big ad campaign where all over the subways, it said Uber, and it had someone like in a sleek car, and it said, "Good things come to those who refuse to wait." And I just remember having this deep sadness at how lost we've become, because it's
American.
Wrong. It's like there's something deeply, I think, I'm normally like a very accommodating, tolerant person, but I think there's something deeply wrong about that. And yet it really illustrates something, like that ad campaign did not come out of a vacuum. It's growing out of from larger trends. And I think that many of us have lost our sense of what what the value of waiting is and our understanding of how to do it. And so waiting becomes a nuisance. It becomes an obstacle. It becomes a source of unpleasantness.
We perceive it as a waste of time.
Yeah, exactly. A waste of time. I guess I think there are two questions here. One is like a more theoretical question, kind of what's the place of waiting, what's the value of patience, etc. And the other is a more practical question. How do we actually cultivate a healthy sense of patience or an ability to wait in a philosophical sense? Because really we're not just talking about being in line for the bus or whatever, or waiting
right.
for when we're talking about the period of time of the bleak November, it's a philosophical kind of waiting. It's an appreciation of the gaps. It's a recognition that I can't have beauty and brightness and joy all the time. So what am I going to do about that? And that's it's a practice. And it's related to the way we understand ourselves and our place in the world. If I can learn to see the bleakness of November if I can really learn to see it as part of this larger cycle, which is necessary and beautiful and natural, and really see it. I mean, not just intellectually know that, to get from October to December, you've got to go through November, but to perceive that, to have that be part of the way I experience the bare trees, not as boring or ugly, but as there's a kind of beauty in that to me. I think it's possible to, by reflecting on these things regularly and giving ourselves time and space to be attentive and quiet when we go out for walks and look at the trees and feel the cold, to just be in a contemplative mood and not try to analyze or explain or comment, but just, how does this make me feel? What does this bring to mind? Not a lot of words, not a lot of theory. Then we can start to, I think, develop a sensitivity to the beauty of these things.
So do we start by just reminding ourselves?
Yeah, in a deep way. This is why we need rituals. Because you could put a reminder on your to-do list on your phone. Reminder about death, reminder about aging. But that's not going to do it, right? There has to be some way of engaging the fullness of our humanity in these reminders. There's something the mind can do when it's given space and quiet and silence. And even with respect to our own thinking, I think that people like you and I can't peer into your mind, but we probably tend to think a lot. We're highly verbal people. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And not that we have to shut that down, but there's also just the regular redirecting attention to how it feels to look at a bare tree and just bringing up the simple reminder, this is a period of transition, connecting it to other perceptions, like the perception of aging. And, it's kind of like an art, like the art of contemplation. And it's different from the art of intellectual inquiry in some ways.
Yes. Doug, what will you take away from this conversation?
Oh, man, so much, so much. I really liked this conversation. There were so many cool things.
Blood month.
Definitely that. Yeah, I might in fact take it and change my calendars, see if there's a way I can change the settings so that it says blood month. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I said that I would expect that the kinds of things that I feel in this contemplative time of year, I would expect that they would be universal. But I didn't know that. And it's interesting to have learned that this is more or less all over the place. And that's affirming. And so, I think I'm taking a general sense of a feeling of being connected to my fellow humans through space and time in this otherwise lonely and isolating and dark time of the year, and blood month.
Yes, the big two.
Yes.
I'm also comforted to know that the reflection and the melancholy of the season are deeply human, and that like I'm participating in an important human tradition when I acknowledge those feelings. And besides that, I'm going to do my best to be present in this stretch and think more about patience. That's a virtue I'm still seeking, but I will get to work on it immediately and I will figure it out tonight. And I just can't wait. How am I doing?
It's urgent.
Well, if we feel more connected to humanity at the end of the day, then I think we're winning November.
That's great. Yeah.
Yay.
Good work.
Good work. Class dismissed. Your hosts for the podcast are Doug and Tara. Tara and Steve produce it, and the music and sound design you hear were created by Steve. You, kind listener, are the most important part. Thanks for being here.